we have a few 10 minutes something for questions. So we're setting the, okay, there's lots of people here putting their hands up. I'm just saying we're setting the framework for a specific solution in the afternoon. So if you have any questions about this framework, okay.
Maybe I could be heard. So if this program of theistic science goes through,
Yeah.
I think what you're, this on?
Yes, it's on.
It seems to me that what you're trying to do is show the pathway from the spiritual to the natural.
Yes.
Is that also, are you in some sense proving the nature of God or proving the existence of God in doing that? If so, are you taking away our freedom to believe or not?
Do you think people will believe what I say? They're free not to.
Well,
they won't believe it.
I'm not talking about you personally, Ian. Just
there's always going to be the external force and the internal force, and we're free to choose which is the cause. So we can't take that away from you. I'm sorry.
That's very abstract. I'm looking for a more.
Okay.
I don't understand your answer, Andy.
Okay. A more simple answer is that we're just there's 27 degrees, and we're looking at the gap between 18 and 19, okay? We've proved that there's a connection between 18 and 19. It doesn't prove that there's anything at the beginning before number 1, because all these 27 degrees are created degrees. God is the zero that starts everything off. So just the fact that there's something that comes into physics between 18 and 19 does not prove that there's a God. People can believe between 18 and 19. The humanists can believe it because they think that what they think has an effect on what they do. Everyone thinks that. So I'm just showing how it could be done. There's nothing to do with God if you don't want to believe in God.
Just checking on you guys.
Fair enough. Sorry. Okay, we'll come back to... Yes?
I always get very excited when 7270 is used because it says so much.
Yeah.
And if I may take that statement and the last judgment 320, and you slot them together, and you get all the degrees, but then you have to add the 3 degrees of height in God, and you end up with 12 or 13. And I was very excited when I read Michio Kaku's Superstring or Hyperspace book, because he says that the universe can only be understood if you have about 12, 13 dimensions. And so I thought that the dimensions must equal discrete degrees. And that would also explain dark matter, because physicists look from below upwards, and writings say if you look from below to spiritual things, you only see darkness. So I think the dark matter that they're looking for is actually a conundrum similar to Heisenberg's principle that the observer imposes that darkness on himself.
Okay.
So it's very interesting. And of course, each discrete degree of heaven is 3 degrees, and so you'd add up the 27 quite easily. But it's very exciting to hear that. Thank you.
I'm going to push back on that slightly, because quite a few New Church people think of each discrete degree as like a dimension. But a dimension, okay, this is one dimension in that direction, that's another dimension, that's another dimension. Those are 3 dimensions. And if I can rotate continuously from one dimension to another. But can you go continuously from one discrete degree to another? Okay, so that's just a little reminder that you can use dimensions as a metaphor for discrete degrees, but discrete degrees are not dimensions. Yeah, well, so I don't know if you know Wilson van Dusen. He wrote a big thesis before he came to Swedenborg in which the extra dimensions, and lots of people have proposed extra dimensions, but from Swedenborg we know that these discrete degrees are not dimensions themselves. Although they have dimensions in them, the spiritual world, each discrete degree has its own 3-dimensional space in it. So that if you can add them together, but you can't go continuously from the 3 dimensions of the spiritual world to the 3 dimensions of the natural world. Okay, over here you had some questions.
Okay, I see Andy Heilman's proposal about the 3 degrees that are above the sun of the world and the 3 degrees below, relating to near-death experiences, in which some people only go so far. They seem to experience like a higher natural degrees, like they might see. One woman saw a shoe at the top of the hospital building that she was in when she was dying, and or people will see exactly what the doctors and nurses are doing. And then there's some people who go higher, into a higher realm, and meet people that they love that have passed on, or they might have a life review with angels, or they might actually see and experience the love from the being of light. Mm-hmm. And well,
I think it's different between seeing a shoe on, was it a shoe on top of the hospital?
Well,
right. They have that kind of view, and that's more linked to maybe the ones below the natural sun. But we can have our spiritual eyes open. And in one sense, but we tend to ground it in the physical because that's where our more easier to think. So when they see a loved one after death or who's died, they're seeing a spiritual reality now, that they're not just seeing his finest things in nature, they're actually seeing him. So we can. Swedenborg, of course, lived in both worlds, and he was called Mirabilis because he'd show up and disappear. If he was going to do his bank account, they couldn't see him in the spiritual world. But if he was thinking these spiritual thoughts, he would come and he'd talk to angels. So we do have that part of our mind still. The most ancients had it open. Ours has been closed for the sake of our salvation. But you can, at times, get those views. Okay. But it's not a common thing.
I'm going to add something. That we are proposing something like a higher physical degree, this 3.1. And so this afternoon we can think about whether it's possibly involved in these experiences that you talk about. Over here, in the white shirt.
I just had a technical question about your renormalization. So you have 2 functions, and most of it comes from going from A to B, but then you said you had like 10 other sub-functions.
The 10 constants.
Right, okay. So do those end up, once you've gone through this process of determining those numbers, are those numbers then constant, or do they change from
in normal physics? Once you've worked them out, and then you can fix it in your calculation.
So then once you have a plus 10 other functions going to B, and then you look at something else, are you taking all those same 10 functions, or are you going to take functions that make it add up?
You have to fit them all simultaneously, so the result of the calculations come out right for the observed masses. But then you can do other predictions, such as interaction between 2 masses, and that comes out, or the magnetic moment of something. They come out right in that case. So the people who do these theoretical physics calculations have to work out their scale, their mass scale, and make sure that comes out in the empirical mass scale, and then they can predict other things. Okay. But the funny thing is that if they do a slightly different, more accurate calculation, then they can't use the same numbers as before, because the calculations are now more accurate, and so there's more of these little individual processes. They have to do it again. So it's difficult to adopt one.
I have a question. Does that mean that each day you have to do a renormalization?
No, if they use the same grid, exactly the same accuracy in their calculation.
Okay.
So they include all the 5th order, 6th order, 7th order, 8th order, all of these, any coupling with 8 links. So if you do that, and on another day it comes out the same. But if you wanted to add 9, then it's different again. Yeah.
My question was, you call it renormalization.
Yeah.
And is that the same thing that Feynman did with his Feynman diagrams? Essentially, he basically would calculate all of the interactions that 2 particles could have. And he found that, of course, like 90% of the what would you call it, the calculation was done within the first 2 or 3 interactions, and all the rest, the 10%, were all those little ones you're talking about.
Well, that's after he's done the renormalization, that's true. But if you just do the renormalization, you find that you get an infinite result. So you have to do renormalization. But those diagrams that I drew with the lines, those are Feynman diagrams. So this is what he did. The lady with the red.
Participate and to be here.
Yes.
And I'm just thinking about being able to identify where people's interests at some point, younger people may be more interested in a love of use, or which of those 9. And I think that as we do that, we can, incorporate more of those, even, as fringe benefits for coming and jumping into maybe the love of wisdom. Maybe that's what's going on.
Yes.
So anyway, I just so thankful. Thank you.
So I think that in science, there's still a role for scientists, because each scientist has a speciality in one particular group of enneads. Because each scientist wants to know causes and effects. That's what science is about. So whenever there's 2 degrees next to each other, there's causes and effects.
I guess what I'm going to, my question is very simple, but I assume you may want to add it to the agenda that you're discussing this afternoon. The question I'm interested in is questions in epistemology, particularly knowledge, as it's known and tested. And the problem I have is what they call in that field the hard problem of consciousness. The hard problem of consciousness is precisely the gap between your 18 and 19. Because it's at that point that irreducibly real images that subjectively come into my mind, as in daydreams or nightmares, or usually daydreams. It has to be usually something that I'm conscious of having, that I know is real. That is to say, unless I'm thinking I'm illusioning or going crazy, then these images in my mind are real. The problem is that they cannot be reduced to, they're not an epiphenomenon of the physical world.
Correct.
There's an element of them that is not materially caused. And I think that's what I would call a truth that epistemologists accept. And that's why it's called the hard
Not all of them accept.
Because if they're not physically based, then where do these images that I know are real come from, and what is their purpose? And that, to me, is the fundamental problem of consciousness. Everything depends on it in terms of whether my conscious mind is epiphenomenal to my brain, or whether there's another reality, somehow or other, that gets translated across some boundary between matter and spirit, or the non-material and the material, that then can influence my world. And to me, okay, that's enough of me.
Okay, I'm trying to look at that boundary and how influence might work. But I think everyone who's read Swedenborg will acknowledge that the ideas, nightmares, whatever, these are the lowest mental elements of the spiritual world, and they do exist. And they have a causal influence on nature. But the question is, we don't know how. But we're going to make a proposal.
Okay, just before we wrap it up, I wanted to just say the rooster's for free with the cage. So he served his spiritual use, and now if you want to eat him or whatever, it won't hurt my feelings. But the nice cage. So if anybody wants it, I left it out there. Well, nobody took it away, unfortunately. But no, anyway, just if you really think it's a neat bird and you want it, please talk to me.